This module is related to bond auctions, which means subastas in Spanish. So US Treasury auctions work the following way. So there's two types of auctions. There's either the single price auction and multiple auction. The single price, it's called uniform as well, and multiple is discriminatory. So let's give an example to be able to understand each one of them. So suppose the US Treasury is selling $2 billion worth of bonds, and there's two bidders, A and B. And A is gonna request these two quantities. So at a yield of 5%, they wanna acquire 500 million, and at a yield of 5.1%, they want to acquire 1,000. And B, at a yield of 4.9%, they want to acquire 500,000, and a yield of 5%, they want to acquire also 500,000. So how does this work? So the first thing to take into account is that we only have 2 billion worth of bonds. So the US is going to start with the lowest yield. So the first 500 are going to go to B. Then it's going to go to the 5%. And then here we have 5% and 5%. So far we have 1.5 billion. And then finally, they're going to allocate like only 500,000 to A. So at the end of the day, what's going to happen in this auction is that B is going to get 500,000 at 4.9 and 500,000 at 5%. A is going to get 500,000 at 5% and 500,000 at 5.1%. Now we can compute here the average yield. So the average yield is going to be basically the amounts times the yield at which it was allocated each amount. So in this case, we're going to get an average yield of 5%. So this is the discriminatory auction because each quantity is assigned at a different yield. So in this case, we're going to have 3 different yields at which the people wanting the bonds are going to get. Now, in the second part, it's the uniform auction. So in the uniform auction, we have what it's called stop out yield. The stop out yield is a yield that is going to be the same for everybody. And this yield is going to be the yield at which the demand exhausts the supply. So if we go back to our previous example, when we reached the 5.1 yield, that's when we got to the 2 billion. So basically this is going to be the stop out yield in that example. And in this case, all successful bidders are going to be awarded that yield, and this is the SOI or stop out yield. And another way of seeing this is that all bids that have a yield that's lower than stop out yield are going to be fully allocated, the ones that are lower, strictly lower, and the bids that are equal to the stop out yield are going to be prorated in proportion to the bid amount. So in that case, A and B are going to get both. So A and B are both going to get 1,000 million or 1 billion at 5.1%. Now, let's give an example where we are going to add 2 things. So let's go back to our example from before. Now, in this case, we're going to have that A and B, and we're also going to have like the 4.9, the 5%, and now 5.1%. And now, so these are going to be the same quantities. So for this, it's going to be same. And then in this one, A wants to have like 500,000 and B wants to have like 1,000. So if we go to what happened before, so basically A up to here, we had allocated 1.5 billion was allocated. And then we had a remaining 500,000 to be allocated. And now it has to be allocated between these two. Now, because the two want to have part of what's left, then it has to be prorated. So what's the quantity to be prorated? So the two of them want in total 1.5 billion, but the first one wants 500,000 A and 1,000 B. So the way this is going to be done is that the 500,000 are going to be allocated as follows. So this is the quantity I want times the 500,000 over the total that both want. So basically A is going to get 166.6. And now for B, so B, they want 1,000, and we only have 500 to allocate over 1,500. So then B is going to get 333.3. So this would be the way to allocate, and this is what we called before the prorated allocation, when the stop-out yield is equal to the yield. If we compare the two types of auctions, then we see that in the discriminatory auction, then the US government has to pay a lower average yield. So they only pay 5% versus 5.1% that they pay in the uniform auction. So that means that in the discriminatory auction, we have something called the winner's curse. Why is it called winner's curse? Well, because the winner, even though you win, you end up getting a lower yield. So in this case, for example, B is getting a lower yield of 4.95 in the discriminatory auction versus the 5.05 that A gets. So there's an incentive to bid less aggressively, but once you win, you end up getting a lower yield, which is not so good for you. Finally, the US Treasury decided to change the auctions from discriminatory to uniform to avoid this type of problem. Finally, here we have a list of the auctions by country. And then, so here we have Mexico. So Mexico, they have both type of auctions, the uniform and discriminatory. We see that the uniform is the less popular and the discriminatory is the more popular type of auction.